Do you know what this book is? The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It is in a collection about the world of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. And as my friend Maggie says, if this is your first time reading this, remember this day because you will never go back to the day before knowing about Narnia. It's exciting, it's wonderful, and I'm excited to share it with you right now. You ready? Chapter 1. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face, as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on their first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said goodnight to the professor and gone upstairs for their first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet and that's no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyway, it's time you were in bed." "Trying to talk like mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we better all go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here." "No, there won't," said Peter. "I tell you, this is a sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here, in that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passageways in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those long passageways and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And those woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There might be hawks." "Badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when the next morning came, there was steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out your window, you could see neither the mountains nor the woods nor even the stream in the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows looking out one direction and 2 in the other. "Stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so. And in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books." "Not for me," said Peter. "I'm going to explore the house." Everyone agreed to this, and that was how our adventures began. It was a sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only to spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected they would, but soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor. And after that room, all hung with green, with a harp in one corner, and then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of little upstairs hall, and a door that led to a balcony, and then a whole series of rooms that led into each other that were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some bigger than the Bible in a church. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe, the sort that had a looking glass in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all, except for a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. "Nothing here," said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worth while trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt sure it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Here's a picture. See the shadows of the children? Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew it is very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went further in, and she found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and so she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face against the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further, and 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel the woodwork against her fingers, but she could not feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, still going further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder if there's more mothballs, she thought, stooping down to feel with her hand. But instead of feeling hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very queer, she said, and went a step or 2 further. Next moment she found that what she was rubbing against her face and her hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. Why, it's just like branches of trees, exclaimed Lucy, and then she saw there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away, where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at nighttime, with the snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there she saw between the dark tree trunks the open doorway of the wardrobe, and could even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she'd set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it is a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It still was daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch over the snow and through the wood toward another light. In about 10 minutes she reached it, and it happened to be a lamppost. She stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next when she heard the pitter-patter of feet coming towards her. And soon after that, a strange person stepped out from among the trees into the lighted lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From his waist upward he was a man, but his legs were shaped like goats, and the hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet he had goat hoofs. He also had a tail, but Lucy didn't notice this at first, because it was neatly wrapped around the arm he was holding the umbrella, so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, and a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there were stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella, and the other arm he carried several brown parcels. What with parcels and snow, it looked like he'd been doing Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise he dropped his parcels. "Good gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. And that is chapter 1 of one of my very favorite books in the whole world. I hope you enjoyed it, and you'll come back for chapter 2.